Good afternoon and welcome to the March edition of the Austin Software Cooperatives Meetup Group. We are reviewing Radical Companies Without Bosses or Employees by authors Matt Perez and Adrian Perez. We are uh, going to move. We're actually on part two, and even though it says part three, I need to move that. And we will be going through this mind map like how we normally do, so people can follow along. And here we go. And we can stop for comments as we move forward. So, in the quick review, this book is about an alternative form of doing business, business entity, or structuring or organization. The first part was really a critique of the existing systems that are out there, including cooperatives, and there's going to be some more critique in part two. Uh, and but part two is going to have some solutions, basically definition of what a radical company is, and then there are some quite interesting takes on how to, I guess, do business as a an alternative type company that's more equitable. So we're gonna have a few chapters here. We may not get through all of them, but I definitely want to get to chapter 11. So I may try to rush because they have some definitions in there. So at any time, I'll just stop and then throughout the chapters and try to get some comments. Make this a bit bigger. All right. So, an alternative to the fiat system, our deepest problems are the inescapable side effects of the fiat system we live in, a system based on domination, a collapsing climate, gaping wealth gap, discrimination against people of color, and exploitation of women. So, to go back to the first, uh, I guess, portion of the book, the fiat just means by decree instead of being based on anything, kind of like fiat money. And so they're using that to describe existing uh, business entities, C Corp, S Corp, LLC, the way that they're structured, when they're in a hierarchy, the way that the decision making is made is by decree, so by the manager. So the first portion of this chapter, they try to define what needs to be defined in order to have a radical company, and what they're saying is important for a radical company. So, people, community, and practice, valuing people, saying meaning and belonging is going to have a higher priority amongst the radical companies. They're going to have a priority on community, so transparency and decentralization, and then a priority on experimentation. Um, I'll say that reading through the book, it seems that there's the prescriptive, saying what ought to be. So uh, something like this, kind of implying that we have a collapsing climate and gaping wealth gap and discrimination, so on and so forth. It's kind of prescribing that that's bad, and so we want to solve that. So that was in part one. We're going to have in this portion um, a description instead of a prescription, but a description of what the radical company is. And they kind of alternate a little bit, saying this is what a radical company ought to be, and then saying what a radical company is. So I kind of had a hard time flipping between the two. So this is kind of saying this is, if your company doesn't uh, value these highly, then it's not radical. Kind of taking that as why it's there. So in the fiat business, hierarchy is not imposed on a code. Okay, yeah. Unlike a fiat business, hierarchy is not imposed. So they're going to go back and forth on talking about co-managed and co-owned, and they are going to try to tease out what those mean. And it's kind of a difficult thing to do, but they're going to describe how other entities do it, and then how they prescribe how to do it, and then they're going to lay out how they did it in their company. It's kind of a loose description of what a radical company is. And I think that this is important because the terminology for some of the other structures that they're critiquing, like cooperatives, there's also a description and then a prescription for those. And it's kind of okay when you're critiquing them, what form are you critiquing? They ought to be a certain way, but then there's someone that claims to be a cooperative that are not, that type of thing. I think the same thing happens for any type of, I guess, solution that you're trying to provide for a new way, alternative way of doing business and structuring or organization, something that's more equitable. So um, they go through a couple of companies and talk about their uh, view of people, community practice. So Gore and associate leaders are selected, not elected by their followers. So talking about how their leaders are made. Here's another company. New leaders are chosen competitively. Valve, the kind of famous video game company, they have people be able to, they have wheels on their desks so they can leave a team whenever they want. Kind of symbolizes that they can leave whenever they want. So they go and follow who they want to. So people aren't really elected. And this goes into the idea of this co-management. So how are you managed? And it should be managed. They're saying in order for you to be a radical company, it needs to be that the people, each person is managed or manages um, everything that any decision that affects them, they should have some way of participating in that decision making. Let's get through here. So meaning and belonging. They had a nice little um, graphic here that tries to encapsulate what meaning and belonging are. So you've got all this play, safety, connect, and this close, and then it goes further and further out. And they're also saying that meaning is important because, as to kind of showcase that people are willing to take less pay if the um, job that they're working on uh, it has more meaning. Transparency and decentralization. They put a high priority on decentralization and transparency, which is interesting to see and cool to see. is pretty difficult to pull these off. So they have a unique way of trying to do that. So here, Roberto and I agreed to practice full disclosure and to decentralize decision making. Decentralization was about opening things up so everybody can make decisions, take responsibility, and be accountable to themselves and their peers. Transparency meant disclosing all the data known or generated by the company, but it's also about being vulnerable. And they say, okay, well, you're not going to be perfect. You can't decentralize everything and be perfect on transparency, but you're going to try. Um, Everybody in your company needs to develop the habit of asking themselves some questions. Am I making this information more transparent or less? So, this is whenever you are trying to come up with a new way of doing things, a new protocol, establishing a new team, and you're trying to set ground rules. And you have some standard operating procedures or what have you. So you should ask yourself, are you making this information more transparent or less? Is this more centralized or less centralized way of doing things? Mm. And presuming that these are the types of questions that will help. If you're doing this or not doing these, will move you forward closer or further away from being a radical company. Now, here they go into this alignment and experimentation. So alignment, I think, is important, and I think this is one of the hard things to nail down. We go back up here and look at these principles, these the three-legged stool here: meaning and belonging, transparency, and decentralization, experimentation. They're saying that you have to have that there in order for there to be some kind of relationship to being a radical company. And then now you have this kind of a chicken and egg thing. You want to get aligned with that three-legged stool that they're talking about. Um, so everyone needs to be on board, but people have their own values and their own ideas. So it's kind of an interesting little dance that has to be done. But first, you have some critique. So ESOP, that's employee stock option plan. This is basically where everybody's owns some stock in the company. This is a way to have employee ownership for a business. They have a critique here that so the ESOP must be set up to really operate with the full participation of the co-owners, and that is almost never the case. So this is a critique. So people can own and not manage. It's kind of counterintuitive, but from other things we've reviewed, it's true. You can have ownership and just check out, and then they bring that up often. Open book management. So this is super transparent, but no ownership. So it's kind of almost the opposite of that. So everyone can see the book, see where the money's going, but they don't have any legal power to make decisions. And then here's a critique of cooperatives. They're saying that every member owns, but they don't necessarily participate in the strategic decisions. So cooperatives have a rule that one member should have one vote. Otherwise, you're really not a cooperative. We're saying that it's also relevant without co-management. I agree. Um, I would say the foremost expert on cooperatives in the United States is Richard Wolff. He's the most popular. The Democracy at Work book. He's an economist and then also podcasts, so on and so forth. Done a lot of talks on popularizing cooperatives in the United States, and he makes this point as well. He even goes so far as having kind of a new terminology called a worker self-directed enterprise. So in his literature, he has worker owned is one level, worker managed is one level, and he has worker directed as a third level. You can be owned by workers and not worker managed. You can be owned, you could be worker managed and not worker owned, and you could be worker managed and worker owned and not worker directed. Now that's a difference that he makes from this book. So, but they kind of capture that with talking about strategy. So management is kind of operational. So you got day-to-day tasks, you're working on some software, something like that, some service. That would be how you manage yourself. But strategy would be how you are competing in the open market. And so directed would be kind of what the either your board of directors does when they elect an executive or what they would do themselves when what at least what they're talking about in the board. And he's saying that you really need to have all three in his definition of what a worker self-directed enterprise would be, or a cooperative. But this is definitely a critique. Now I wanted to make a point here that what matters is that members get to participate in shaping the questions. So not just voting, but you need to participate. Now we've reviewed a book called Participatory Democracy, Carol Pateman, and it talks heavily about what participating in the decision making process means, whether in civics, government, or in business. And there are different types of participation, and there's binding and non-binding ways to participate with the decision making, and all of that um, needs to be considered when you're trying to reason about um, when the members, how much power the members have in any organization. Now, I just wanted to point out, though, that here it says what matters most is members get to participate. But later, when they're describing a radical company, they're saying that they must participate. And this is where the rubber meets the road. So, what ends up happening, long story short, is when you have worker managed, worker owned, worker directed, what happens is in any type of participatory democracy, when you're trying to get people, the trick is to try to get people to participate more. But empirically, what happens is people are apathetic and they don't want to participate. They want to, and this is again a political science question. It's empirically studied and proven. People want to participate as little as possible in any democracy. So the trick is to try to get people to participate more, whatever way you can. So this book has solutions for that. But just wanted to point out here that they say get to participate, but later they're going to say must. So,
Does the must part feel like they're imposing, or is
oh
it
yeah,
just
that's what must means.
okay? Well, it's someone.
That's what must means, and then that's what I was saying before: descriptive versus prescriptive.
Yeah.
So,
So
like, should participate. Oh, you ought to, in order
mhm.
for it to be best outcomes for you and to be moral and all that. Must is describing. So, at any point, you could say, "Oh, we're not really a. This is not a radical company anymore because your people are not participating," which is the critique of the cooperatives, right?
So when you have a radical company, is participation can take lots of different levels. And for example, in a democracy, you need everybody to vote and be engaged, ideally. But there's other forms where people participate in, maybe facilitating a meeting, but they're not really stating what their ideas are, and maybe they're okay with just facilitating the meeting. So they're playing a role. So I guess there's a difference between having a say and being actively engaged. And I
That's right.
wonder if you were to take a different model, like let's say sports, we assume everyone playing a game, let's say soccer, wants to be there and is, excited to be involved, and they're all participating. And you don't say the problem with soccer is people, it's so hard to get people to participate. So is there any carryover from that model into like a radical company is kind
I
of my
think so. Yeah.
question. Okay.
There's a portion in there where they're talking about things need to be fun. So there's a cultural portion and those types
Mm-hmm.
of, so it's trying to get engagement. Um,
Right.
really just trying to, and then there's something that you put in. You said in a democracy, people need to vote. People can vote,
Mm-hmm.
but we didn't say that they must vote,
Right.
right? And then that's just electoral,
Do
right?
they talk about gamification?
They didn't use gamification. I
Because
will
that
say
could be
that
an
the
interesting
people
thing.
that they're um, one of the groups that I want to say one of the books that they reference is the game of business.
Uh,
I'm not sure. So there's one, but there's another one. The I want to say it's I'm getting confused. There's a game of business I read them years ago, like over like a 20 years ago, and then the one where they're talking about the Gore, like the Gore Tex group,
mhm.
and I want to say there's some overlap there. Don't quote me on that. But the cultural portion, I think it's bringing that in. I will say that the part where they're doing the compensation, which is definitely what I want to get to,
Mhm.
they have a novel point system that I think is probably would fit under some type of gamification. I think.
Okay, I'll sit tight for that. I guess I just wanted to mention one other thing. I finally got the book, and unfortunately, I just got it today.
Mm-hmm.
I've been reading the kind of the freebie stuff online.
Mm-hmm.
They'll give you like a couple chapters or something like that, and then you have to buy the book. But I just got the book, and the first thing I did is went to the end notes, and I really realized I don't know much about all the references. Like I don't see much social theory, political theory. I see very few economists mentioned, you know.
Right.
So I'm kind of curious how this all works.
They
But I'm just putting those out as questions I have in my head while I'm listening to you.
Yeah, they reference a lot of the future of work
Hmm.
group, which is it's a big consultant, subgenre. You know, business consultants, but they just are talking about co-management and these types of things. So it's alternative business uh, strategies. So they have a lot of references there.
I
Um,
see. Okay.
yeah, and so I just
Cool.
want to say, like, finish this one off. They put a high priority on experimentation as well. So I'm just gonna do that. So
Good.
alignment and experimentation, the end of that chapter. Okay, so let's get into alignment. All right, this three finger scout salute. So you have impact, purpose, and mission. I think this is always also a challenge with any business book with trying to describe. They all recommend if you have a business, you need to describe why you exist. It's interesting because Peter Drucker is like the father of business consulting books. He basically you're a business if you have a customer. He just doesn't end run around it altogether. But most of them have some kind of you need to describe what your vision is, and I think when people attempt to define this, it's a difficult thing to do. So I kind of I like to give them the kudos when they try to do. I think they did a decent job here. So impact is our beacon, our clear point of light just over the horizon that guides us. This is what many call vision, but we wanted to put a more emphasis on that on the impact that vision will have on the world. All right, so this is impact. Impact is our beacon. All right. Purpose is the reason why we as a company are focused on this particular impact. So again, impact, that's like our dent in the universe. What are we going to do that's going to matter after we're all gone? That's how I'm saying what they are saying. Purpose is the reason why we as a company are focused on this particular impact. Why we as a company are focused on this impact, right? So you got outside of you, this is something we want. Let's just say, oh, we want to do, you know, have a clean earth or something like that, environmental, right? All carbon emissions. That's an impact. We want to get rid of them. Purpose, why we as a company are focused on that. So then now it makes it more personal. And then the mission is how, what we are going to do. So I think any definition of these needs to, I think it needs to go down this path of what they did. They'll have different terms where people mix and match all these things, but all I think they covered it. And then basically, why does this matter? If you don't have this, then people can't get aligned. That's the argument. You have to do it in some way. I kind of agree, but again, you could not be aligned and make money. People make money in all kinds of different ways, but probably not going to be that efficient. So this makes things easier. And if you have alignment, then you can it, things won't be as difficult. I would say that's the argument. Values. This is also an interesting challenge. So we've all, if you work in corporate America, someone might put some values. What do we value? Integrity, and put that on the wall or whatever. And then people tend to wrestle with it, especially if it's a big entity. I don't really value integrity, that kind of thing. So there's stated values, and then there's really what that group values, right? So if they really value customer service, that they will go the extra mile, and people will be talking about that, and they'll take pride in that. Or, you know, value families, um, you know, work life balance, these types of things. You have really what you value, and then you have what's the stated values. And that's always a challenge, I'll say, in this business literature. When someone talks about values, I respect when they kind of try to realize that there's a challenge there, and then how do you how do you deal with that challenge, right? And I would say here is where they did that to a certain extent. If you can't identify what makes a process, right? So process and values are yin and yang, they're saying. And if you can't identify what makes a process valuable, then you're following some bureaucratic something where basically it's just a set of rules. So you have a series of steps, and you say, why do we, let's say we have a series of steps, and it's how you engage a customer. And it's like, well, why do we have this series of steps when, these 5 steps when you greet them and whatever it is, or how you do support or something like that. And there's a process that saying everyone should follow this. Well, why? And if you can't really say that, then that's probably an indicator that you don't really have though those aren't your values. Let's say they tried that. And then they said their values ended up describing the qualities they wanted the future employees, Nearsoftians, the name of the company Nearsoft, to have. Now, a nice other thing is they started using their values on the interview process. So you got identifying your values, right? Which aren't top down. right? They kind of bubble up. And then there is prioritizing them in interview and saying, no, does this person naturally have these values or not? Right. So they put a high priority. So that's how they um, try to reason about and tackle the problem of mission and all these things of values, which I think any business book ends up having to do. So I think they did a good job there.
I have a little question about values.
Mhm.
Are these like some kind of a priori prescriptives, or they
Nope.
so so they're generated, and they're generated, I would imagine, in the group. But then when you're hiring somebody, in a sense, you've already established a culture, and
Yeah.
it's a question as to whether they fit into the culture or not. Um,
Yeah.
but as we all know, people can come, very kind of green to a job. It's new. And so in some level, maybe you want somebody that isn't quite, solidified in what their values are, and that they can be cultivated in within the group. So I guess I'm a little bit wary of how this is all established and what the selective process is, and because I don't
Yeah.
see people coming, like when you say, what, when you're doing the job interview, to see if it's kind of inherent in the person already. I mean, people literally learn how to be human by interactions, and including business. They learn how to be political. They learn how to be how governments run through just working a job. And I'm talking about it not in a theoretical sense, but in a highly practical sense. So um, I guess I'll just sort of follow that line as you go along, because I'm very curious how these things are generated.
I think you're right. They like that participatory democracy. They have the
Mm.
first part of that because political science fascinated on how to try to instill participation in democracy because people are apathetic. And one of the things that one of their rationales was after they studied all these different things, they did education, they did all these other things. They're like the thing that had the best response was having democratic processes at work, and that made people. I shouldn't say made, but it had the best responses on um, increasing participation in democracy. Period.
Okay, I
So
see what you're saying. That's why the process is so important,
yeah,
and then that's where the learning probably happens as well.
yeah, and well, but it's a chicken and egg. So it's what
Oh,
JG said, right? So you're getting so how do you bring someone on board if do you want to care about people who are just getting into the workforce? Well, obviously. Well, if you're saying something like, let's say that people who are higher participatory skill set, whatever, let's just say that those types of people are more self learners, just for argument's sake. So these are like different values that they said that they want, right? So, oh, self learner instead of waiting for someone to train me, kind of thing. Oh, they're not? Okay, we don't want them. Well, what if that's something you, that's going to be not as prevalent in someone just entering into the workforce? Now you're going to be selecting for um, against people who are not having. You're not going to be able to instill those values in someone. Well, basically, what you're saying, we need to figure out how to instill the values that we want. We have the other side is if you try to absorb too many people that don't have your values, now the organization can be broken. So it's a chicken and egg problem, right? It's probably you can afford to absorb so many and then not too much, right? I know. I think. Otherwise, I think it's a again it's a problem of diversity. So if all you do is bring on people that have your own values, now you're not diverse. But then again, you're probably saying, well, we want people who are going to fit well inside of a radical company, right? That kind of thing. Okay. Well, but then the people who aren't in that type of company already probably don't have those values, kind of thing. So, um,
I would think that what you'd really be looking for is, like you said, people that kind of learn on their own. But you don't want somebody that's too solo because then they don't know how to work with others. So I think it's, like sometimes, I don't know if you've ever heard the argument for why a humanities degree is a good thing for the workforce, because what you've shown that you can do is you can write a good argument, write a good paper, you can read a bunch of different stuff, and you can learn a bunch of different stuff. So what you really are is just open to change, process, learning, etc., as opposed to somebody that's highly specialized, like their education was highly specialized, and then your company is whatever slightly different, then it might be harder for them to jump ship because their whole trajectory has been to follow this one line, as opposed to somebody that is just a good learner and open and comfortable with that aspect of not knowing, but coming at it in an open kind of collective sort of way, and are used to learning as a participatory process. Then that's the kind of person you'd want. Of course, when it comes to values, if your, let's say, your product is cool, of course you want somebody that enjoys the product and thinks it's cool, because if they had no interest in it, that's one of the things that's maybe tying everybody together. You know what I mean?
yeah, that is a great point here.
Okay, I'll let you go. I'm sorry if I keep interrupting. I do find this interesting though. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, we're just hitting on all the why this, is a difficult thing. Um, all right, so radical distribution. Let's try to knock this out. Um, all right, so there's a critique about the existing entities that are out there. Um, we went through oligarchic ownership. We went through Marxism. They critique Soviet Union. The paternalistic approach, saying some of that was happening in Europe, and it didn't last. And then they said the cooperative model, and they're saying it hasn't taken off the world like fire. Anyways, I added in this little quote here. Cooperatives are, I mean, a lot of people don't realize they're really 12% of the people on Earth are part of a cooperative. And there's a trillion in assets, so it's actually a lot. It's just not as popular in the United States, but in other places it's a lot more popular. But I put some quotes there. But basically, the point being, and again, saying something's popular doesn't mean it's good, and I don't think that that's what their point was. So, uh, because the regular, capital business structure that we have right now, very popular. It's the one that has created all of this wealth inequality and all that.
McDonald's is popular.
Right,
Say no
right.
more.
So yeah, so the whole thing of not taking off, you know, but the point being is that people being excited about it is what I think, and saying, okay, this is really solving some problems, and I think that's really what they want. But they're going in here to some more critiques. Again, I already went through this in the beginning, but I generally speaking agree. If you don't have some way of addressing, there's ownership, management, and directing, right? If you don't have some way of addressing that, even if it's a cooperative, it's just another exploitative group. You can, just like you can exploit in an electoral democracy, you can exploit in a cooperative, in a regular entity, and all these things like that. And so then it becomes, okay, we're going to try to define, like what Wolf did, oh, those three terms and participation and all these things, and then how you do that. So radical companies, they're presenting this as you need to have a better understanding of what co-management is and co-ownership is in order, and they're kind of prescribing it, saying, oh, if you do that, not that you'll become the most popular McDonald's, but people could be excited about that and excited about it for the right reasons, not exploitative reasons, but because it's solving, you're having businesses that are better citizen of the world, so doing environmental, less exploitative. This is what I think that they're trying to say, and they're opposing that to fiat companies, which a fiat company for them is um, where it's hierarchical, right? Even if it's what I would call a republic. So the people who are the executives and all that were elected by the people, and they have a rule that, oh, we can elect. They still can be exploited even in a republic, just like how in a regular democracy republic you can vote leaders in and still get exploited or still get manipulated, whatever, right? So that's their point with, I believe, with some of these definitions and saying what is fiat and what's not fiat. All right, so now let's get into this distribution stuff because this is quite interesting, I believe. All right, so this rubber meets the road. So what I will say, all discussion about management, ownership, and all that stuff. Let's all get together, whether it's a business, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a group of friends that get together and all that. All the stuff they're talking about organization, it's all fun and games. Where the rubber meets the road is where you have to make a decision on resources, on rival resource things that can't go to everyone. So if one person gets something, another gets excluded from it. That's rival. So there's a finite amount and you got to make decisions on it. Now the rubber meets the road. How do they decide? Now they gave an example of this Rosedale distribution. So you're going to be making money in the company. Okay, fine. What did they do? How are you going to distribute? So as the company grows, a small amount of cash and shares are put, this here, well, this is just an example, but a small amount of cash are put out for distribution every month. So this is an example, and then they get into theirs. So this is an example, Rosedale. Every member gets, say, $1,000, an equal portion of wealth every month, but you don't get to keep it. You got to distribute it, and not to yourself. They give it to whoever you feel like, and you could spread it. You can give it all to one person, or you can spread it out, and that's how you're going to have a direct impact on the company. They say company ownership. So this is a Rosedale distribution, and then they try to tease this apart in their own flavor of this. All right. So radical distribution. So radical distribution, same concept, but um, okay, here, based on the radical is based on the Rosedale. Everyone has a direct hand in doing something that's usually reserved for owners, wealth and ownership distribution, and they get in the habit of doing so. And like the Rosedale, the process is scalable. 10,000 people can distribute wealth, ownership, same way. Now, but they are doing it off of a basic, what you could call a point system. They're calling it RAD, right? One of the things that helps with is you can have no money. You're starting out, it's work, sweat equity at this point. And every month you come together and you say, we have 100 points, 100 RADs. Everybody can give out those to who they think is equivalent of a point a month, or whoever's that you think is good, but not yourself, right? And then later, you can distribute those points to get say what it's worth, whatever. But you have something to where you can value each other every month, and it creates incentives and recognition of accomplishments and effort. Now, let's go into theirs. Not a currency issued before there's revenue, like I was saying. So you can have, because you can have contributions before outside of revenue.
It's almost like a stock, like they're handing out stock. It will gain value as the company goes.
Yep. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Um, they're given criteria. The giving criteria is completely up to each person. You can start with some guiding criteria, but it's still up to each person. They represent the dynamic ownership. The absolute number is allocated uh, to it either stays the same. Okay, the absolute number of rads allocated to me either stays the same or goes up at every distribution. Okay, yeah. So as an example, if you have 100 rads last cycle and you get 50 this cycle, your total is 150. If you didn't get any, you still got 100. So and then this part, your percentage, if you end up wanting to use that somewhere, your percentage is where they use the word ownership up here. Your percentage goes up and down based off of your, yeah, right here, goes up and down based on how many rads you have total compared to everyone else. So, if you have 10 people and um, you start getting more rats than everyone else, you're going to have more than 10%. You could have 15%, you could have 50%, right? And then you could calculate your percentage ownership, whatever. So this is talking about ownership. One of the things I think that is okay, yeah, I just did some of my notes. In game theory, it's cumulative voting. You were talking about gamification, but in game theory, this cumulative voting is also in participatory budgeting. You can have cumulative voting for projects and then also contribution. So basically, everyone gets a certain amount of points. You give all those points to one thing, to one project, one idea, or to all of them, spread it about apart, but everyone has the same amount. And it gets around some of the problems of all the different other, some of the other types of voting, especially regular. But this here is a way for waiting, a way for getting feedback. Let's move forward into some of these other things. But the feedback that you get from this, it forces people to communicate, which I think is a natural. Um, it it makes the incentive system more natural. This feedback loop, right? And so people, it incentivizes cooperation, not just, oh, I want to make more money, but I need to showcase what I did, so on and so forth. So I think it's pretty novel, and it's kind of simple to understand, right? And so here again, they're doing once a month, this all this stuff like that. It scales, so there's kind of a problem that you may think of that. Hey, what if somebody on this side of the company doesn't know what someone on the other side of the company is doing, right? Um, the argument is that that works. You're biased for the people that you're closest around. It's canceled out by people's bias on the other side of the company that don't know you. They have bias for the people that they're closest around. So it naturally cancels itself out. And then as people share and grant each other's rads, they learn the value of what they've built together at a visceral level. So you're learning what people value that you're doing. Uh, People will be encouraged to learn to communicate better. They will learn from their peers to value their accomplishments. They will learn to talk about their failures, what they've learned from them, and how it can be valuable to others. That kind of thing. So you're getting judged by your peers naturally. At first glance, you may think, "Oh, it's a popularity contest." Well, on the other side, you know, when it comes to, let's just think of a traditional distribution system at the end of the year. Let's say a large services company, law firm, whatever. It's what you could call a gray hair method. The wise person says, "Oh, your bonus is going to be this much," and they may decide at the beginning of the year we're doing it based off this and this, but it's still based off of the wise old person decides. Right? This is a gray hair method. There's basically really three methods to do distribution. There's keep what you kill. There's gray hair, which is what most do services, and then there's points. Points can get complicated. This points is having looked at many point systems. This points is quite simple, so that's why I think it's interesting. Um, but advantage of points, it's more objective. This one, it's incentivizes participation. So we kind of killing a couple birds with one stone there. I will say this part here, um, Rosedale distribution. I will just bring this back up again. This part here, every member gets, say, 1,000. This part is the part that I would say is the difficult part. How do you decide the beginning, like what it is that gets reasoned about and all that? I would argue that if it's not the surplus, so if it's not the one way to look at it is a profit, the extra, what is what is left over after all the costs are done. If it's not that, then probably need to revisit it. I'd say that that's expectation at that point. But basically, outside of that, I'm thinking that this is quite interesting. They've got equality versus equity. Definitely, one person. How do you deal with when one person, um, you know, is working 80-hour work weeks and another person's working 20? Right. At some point, they have some studies here that people are gonna start getting upset. I think that's kind of intuitive that is what happened. There are some entities that somewhat large entities where they said nope, everyone's getting paid the same, no matter what, right? And and they've uh managed to stay around for 20 years plus. But generally speaking, um if you, there's a difference between equality and equity. Equity means how much you're putting in, it your is how much you're getting out based off of what you and your group, right? There's a more rigorous definition of equity in game theory, but um I think just addressing it, knowing that there's a difference, and then you all being able to reason about that as an entity, I think that's what their point is. And then their system, I want to say that this is descriptive because they call it a radical distribution. Okay. Um, I think that you need to do something like this in order to be a radical company where you handle equity versus equality. So being equitable versus being egalitarian. At that point, you're able to. I want to say you're going to be closer to the radical company. Then they right, equitable versus all of this stuff like that. They added these in. So after you do your distribution every month, you have retrospectives, feedback, and banners. I'll just say retrospectives are everyone gets together and it's optional, but you say, oh, I didn't get any rads at the end of this month. What was my criteria? What was your criteria? Whatever, right? That's this feedback. So you're getting retrospectives are specifically what people use as criteria when they were putting their stuff out. Then feedback, someone can anybody can call for a feedback session. right? So I guess this is separate from retrospective. So they're saying, why didn't I get this? Or like, why didn't I? What could I do to fulfill these criteria or whatever? And then banners, which also is pretty novel. You can decide, people can give their rads to a banner. So you have a project, you can, let's say you just put it on a website. This is going to be a an investment, a cause, an accomplishment, or something like that, and people can actually give their rats to that, right? Um, so that's what that's all about. All right, explain all that. So any questions? Also, everything is um, radically transparent for them. So they basically said, yeah, they said that it's probably not going to work unless it's complete. Everybody knows what everyone gets paid, and everybody knows on this distribution who they distributed to. That's how they said that they were doing it. So
So the points do gain value. Is that? I just wanted to make sure I heard that right.
yeah, it's cumulative. They also put in there, they said here, there's other ways. I don't know where they said it, but there's other ways you could do this. Um, you could make it to where they disappear after a while, so they don't accumulate too long. Um, so they put that in there.
When you say disappear, is it like people cash them in?
No, they have a time. Like
Huh.
if you did a bunch, in my mind, I was talking with the author, because these guys interviewed me in December. One of the things I brought up was, imagine, I believe I brought this up. This is one of my favorite examples. If you have a law firm, so it's a partnership, right? Everybody is an owner. Everybody, you know, is a worker, and they manage themselves, whatever. In a small law firm, they have big law firms with 1,000 people and whatever. Um, all right. So your partners, let's say you got 5 people, you make 2 million a year. Okay. Somebody comes in, and they're coming in, right? So you between the five of you, you're making 2 million a year. Someone's coming in and they got a $5 million case, right? And they're like, hey, you know, um, I'm bringing this to the table, and how do you deal with that numbers wise, right? So that's always an interesting thing, right? So you could say, well, that's too much for us, for our system, because basically we're going to come in, and that 5 million that you're bringing in, we're going to decide where all that money goes. And they're like, nope, I'm just going to go somewhere else where I can get more than, like there's that problem. But within this, right, let's say that someone came in and you negotiated with them with this system, the rads, whatever, and they're like, oh, you're bringing in the 5 million coming in. Okay, we're going to give you 5 million rads, right? And so basically, you're going to have, basically, let's just say 20% of the company instantly when you first come in, or 30%, when in their definition of ownership. Okay. Well, you can also say that, and well, what if that person comes in and they do their case, they get paid? Let's say they did the whole thing in 6 months, and now then they just disappear for 5 years. Well, that, but now you have someone having this uh, extra impact and control over the company, or this outsized influence on it, based off of ownership, based off of whatever, them distributing rad, whatever it is that you want to put, whatever ownership means, what you decide that it means here, um, for these over these 5 years, right? And you can put in, well, if you are not active, right? So you're not participating, which is one of the things they value. If you want to put in there, well, everything gets zeroed out after, it's been around for 3 years, or a year, or 2 years, or what have you. But when you come in, you're going to have it. Maybe it's a 1-to-1 with dollars. Maybe it's, whatever it is. But something like that, it's an option. I think they put it in there. Maybe you leave it forever. It's handled differently. For There's all types of other ways to handle this kind of thing. But I found it, like, as far as simplicity and having people understand, I think those are the types of issues that you gotta to wrestle with. You can always, when you don't, basically you're just saying, um, I'll just call them high performers. You're basically saying, well, we're not gonna reward you for being a high performer, on that type of thing. Like, you just won't be able to compete, and that's kind of a problem with these types of, with really all types of alternative entities that are more ownership, more egalitarian in their ownership or proportionate or what have you. Someone being attractive to someone who can make a lot of money, let's say, by going to a large entity, you're just you're not going to be able to do those outsized incentives for that type of person. You could say, well, you're going to have more autonomy here. You're going to That person's going to have all autonomy they want when they, like I said, in the scenario that I gave, that person is going to command what they want when they go to another entity, right? They're making 2 million a year. They're bringing in 2.5 years worth of work, right? Um, they're going to be able to. So it's a negotiation thing, and being able to attract someone like that, that's you where you struggle, I would say, because a larger entity is like, yeah, oh, we'll bring you in. I mean, we're making 10 million, we're making 30 million, we bring in 5 million, we know whatever much a year, and you get to keep, sure, you get to keep half of that, whatever, come on, and there's no problem. So you know that's kind of just, I don't know if it seems intuitive to you that that would be a natural problem that people have to wrestle with. And there's different ways, like people just say, we just don't want somebody like that, and it's kind of odd to say you just don't want a high performer. Some people is like, there's no such thing as a high performer. Compare, that's it's also interesting to say, but
Well, I mean, I'd say if you mean by a high performer, somebody that's truly just motivated by money, then maybe that's not the right model for them anyway. So it's not a good match.
yeah, that's
I
definitely
mean,
that. But I mean, there's assembly line, working on assembly line.
mhm,
How much better can you turn a wrench to the next person,
right,
right? And then there is, like, literally, there are people who are 50 times better than the next person as far as being in the courtroom, right? They are much, 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 much better. Their win rate is much, much, much better. They're just, their reputation, their network. They're like, I know these judges. I've been around for 20 years. Like, they are, their capabilities and all the other stuff, they're just head and shoulders better than the next person. So
right.
there's, you know, that's what I mean about a high performer. Like, they
Maybe you
they
look. Maybe again, we could look at the sports model. There's
yeah,
obviously people that
yeah,
excel, but
mm-hmm,
they still have the support of the team. So if you take money out as the primary incentive and make basically other things like even prestige or just feeling like you're stoked that you're at the top of your game and that you're making the company really successful. um, it's almost like you need to shift the value system a bit because we're going to assume that the radical company from a fiscal perspective is doing well. Like if you take that as a given,
yeah,
then quality of life, work relations, the community, the culture, the shared values, the products produced, all of those are part of the incentive structure. And if those things aren't part of the individual's incentive structure, then maybe they don't belong in that community. Just like if you were you played hockey, but you actually hated the sport, it'd be a certain point where you just leave because, it wouldn't be just a matter of winning. It'd be a matter of actually enjoying the game. So I think that if we use the kind of classic high performer um, out of the corporate model person as a measuring stick, we may be coming with the wrong type of measurement. So I don't know. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, it's kind of on this side, on the cooperative side, and all that. That's kind of normally how we think, and we don't attract the high. I'm just gonna tell you, we do not attract the high performer. we just don't. They just can offer so much money, and there's also a thing called the brain drain. You get a high
Yeah,
performer,
yeah.
and they just can offer so much.
Well,
It's
that's a problem like Canada has. I mean, America benefits so much from people coming, and now we can buy whatever $1 million gold
yes,
card.
yeah,
Um, there, you have to have some Canadians that go, okay, I don't know if you want to call it patriotism or what, but
yeah,
something that would keep them in their own country doing that work when, I mean, the level of people seeking them out from whatever Apple or wherever is
yeah,
insane.
yeah,
And so, Canada, which might have a more socialized education system and might make a lot of these resources available, um, basically loses their resources to countries that don't value that. So
yeah,
the drain is not just on the brain level; it's really on a societal level,
yeah,
on an
yeah,
economic level. Not just because that person could make your economy more money, but literally, it is your economy that's creating that person on some level. It's a support system that made that person who they are. Not entirely, but certainly, it's an important part. I mean,
yeah,
you can meet many people that were kind of flunky students that basically had the right resources come together at the right time, and now they're extremely successful business people. So you can never undervalue like support systems and all of that. But the problem is that those support systems on some level are disrespected because if you're just chasing the dollar bill. Yeah. So I mean, this is really what's interesting to me is I like to look at every aspect of life, education, religion, ideology as a little microcosm, and the corporate, fiat structure that we know of America, the Wolf of Wall Street, all of that is really a reflection of kind of a broader, um, almost like cultural posture that people take. So it is a problem in terms of how do you keep these communities tight. And I think, right off the bat, you don't want a high performer in the sense of, some sort of a wolf. You need people that work together.
nah, definitely. I think it kind of goes without saying. I think the there's a lot of studies like for cooperatives
Mm,
where that brain drain I'm getting that from the studies. So basically,
mm,
one of the issues for cooperatives is really when I say cooperative, any entity, even including this one, any entity that has a co-ownership, co-management type style,
mm,
there is, for instance, like if you're a services company, right? You get paid, let's say in Austin or there's a Midwest or something like that, and you're a computer programmer or principal or whatever, and you like everybody you work with and all that, um, and you're getting paid. Let's say you get paid 250,000 a year, okay.
mm,
Um, when you start getting to around 5x of that, so about 1 million a year, 1.2 million a year, people start to say, I can work for 5 years and retire. That's what you're up against.
right.
See what I'm saying?
Yep.
Right. So people can be like, I can hold my nose for 5 years.
Hmm.
That's what you're up against. Now,
Yeah, it's true.
when you said societal, that's what I think the answer is. Like when people start, if it were, and I think it could be, where our language is, you know what, these companies are exploitative, and you're basically going to an exploitative company, right? People don't think that, at least in the United States, we kind of have this idea of it's all fair. We're consensual type basic. Oh, I
Mhm.
consented to it. It's not exploitation. Go over there, work. If I worked at a Google, work, whatever, getting paid. It's not exploitation. We're, this is what we're doing. You bought their products, and not exploitation. It's not that big. We don't really talk that way. But if that became more of our societal, on the societal level, like you're saying, language, then people, I think it would be, oh, you're going over there, but you basically are kind of you know, giving into this like systemic exploitation, the systemic, like, people, when people go to Apple, people don't look at Apple and say, oh, you got, I don't know, like 300,000 employees here, but you got 2 million in China, and they are at slave wages. Huh. You're going over there, and you're contributing to this slave labor. Yeah, we don't really say that.
No, of course not.
Right. But I think that could happen. Like we could get it
Oh,
to
you mean
be,
you think it could be an issue of like people feeling a broader connectivity
yeah,
and not want to? Yeah, I totally
yeah,
agree with you.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I don't have a lot of experience in the corporate world, so I mean, this is very interesting to me because I'm learning a lot from the books that we've that you've outlined in this group. But
Mhm.
I used to work as a club promoter, and I was kind of my own boss, and I'd have a various artists that I'd work with, and we just loved what we were doing. We loved designing the flyers. We loved bringing acts from Europe. We just, we loved it, dressing up the clubs. And of course we'd make money sometimes. We'd get a lot of dollars coming into the door, but I won't say that was the main incentive. It was really like to build. This is San Diego, to build a music scene, and to feel like we were contributing to San Diego, which sometimes can be kind of devoid of things. It's like second culture to a second stage to LA. But like you're from Austin. Austin's a great idea. I mean, they got an incredible music scene. So a musician in Austin's going to have a very different experience than a musician in, I don't know where, Dallas. Or I don't really know. But I'm just saying that if that becomes a bigger value to somebody, um, then then it really shifts the whole nature of the game and the relations and all that.
Yeah.
I ended up getting a job in LA, and I was doing parties for Tyrese and like
Mm.
big actors and stuff like that. It fucking sucked my soul. I'd make 2 grand in one night and hated every single bit of it. And I stuck it through for 2 years, and basically got a massive artist warehouse in San Diego and started throwing speakeasies. But I was like, the level of soul robbing that was happening in that job. I could write a manual on how to deal with coked out bosses because that's all I ever dealt with.
I
So
get you. I
so,
understand.
and I gained weight, and I looked like shit. I'm sure my blood pressure went up. I wasn't healthy. So I think, balance, community, the culture that you live in, if you love the city that you live in, you love everything there. Those are values that can hold people, in a particular company with a particular mindset and worldview or culture or whatever you want to call it, ecosystem, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And I do think there's young people that are really like, they pay a lot of attention to like, well, what kind of ecosystem is this? You hear that word a lot these days. So I think that people do kind of like, okay, I'm going to make this much, but this company is a much healthier company to be in, so maybe I'll choose the healthier one. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Oh yeah. They that especially Zennials, millennials, and
Mhm.
Zennials are not putting up with. They're
Yeah, I
not
mean
putting up.
the whole anti-work culture that happened
Yeah.
during COVID. I mean, that's a perfect example. People are like, "What the fuck am I living on this dying planet for?" And hating
Yeah.
my job.
Yeah. Yeah. It's quite interesting. So
Okay, well, I'll let you get back in. Thanks so
yeah.
much. Okay.
Yeah. We're